Okay. Got it.
Well, hi everyone, welcome. It's Friday night for virtual Friday Star Literary Series, and welcome to our summer schedule. This is the first time that we've gone live for 3 weeks. My guest tonight is Joseph Milosch, and Joseph is a writer, short story writer, and a poet from San Diego. If you want to find out more about him, you can go to josephmiloschpoet.com, and I'll read some of his bio because I know you guys can just go there and do it. Joe Milosch's new book is A Walk with Breast Cancer. His book Home Plate was the Heart and Other Stories was nominated for the American Book Award and the Eric Hoffer Best Small Press Publications. His other books are The Last Pilgrimage, Poems and Landscapes of a Woman and a Hummingbird. He's won the City of San Diego Central Library Author of the Month. He has multiple nominations for the Pushcart, and his books of poetry are The Last Pilgrimage, Poems and Landscapes of a Woman and a Hummingbird. And you know, you can check out his bio. You can see all the awards that this gentleman has won. Last 40 years, he's worked as a trail locator for the Cleveland National Forest and as a heavy construction inspector in the private sector. His poetry draws on these experiences as well as his experiences growing up in the farmland north of Detroit, Michigan, and his army experiences during the Vietnam War. So without any other words from me, let's turn it on over to Joseph.
Oh, I'm glad everyone showed tonight. Thank you, Timothy, for inviting me. I one time took a class with Juan Felipe Herrera and had to leave town. And I know it may be hard to believe, but my wife and I had a big fight. I was right after her cancer. And when I got up there, we were given an assignment to write a poem. I couldn't. I was taking a shower. This poem came to me. And in my entire life, this is the only poem that ever came to me in one shot. I had to call my wife. She wasn't talking to me, so I'm begging over the old phones on the answering machine. I'm saying, Patsy, please pick up, because when I got married, she made me promise I'd never read a poem about her without her permission. And I'm pleading. She picks up the phone and says, this better be good. And I read her this poem called Why is a Scar on a Man? Why is a scar on a man a mark of distinction? On a woman, a mark of disfigurement? I don't know. Why is it funny when a man loses his hair and tragic when a woman loses her? I don't know. Could you make love to a bald-headed woman? What will you say when the x-rays turn the scar on her breast raw hamburger red? When she's bald, lost her eyebrows, and lies closed-eyed with a skeletal look? Will you kiss her and tell her she's beautiful? I don't know. What do you do in the bedroom when she is thinking of death and she cries? I hold her hand and I breathe. So my wife was a Mexican lady. We went to her hometown, my mother-in-law's hometown, and she was, it was a small village of less than 1,000 people. All her aunts and cousins who hadn't seen her for 17 years were trying to teach her how to be a good wife in 1 week, and made her grumpy. And one night she was being a little cantankerous with me. And I said, do you realize you're the only woman in the town that doesn't think I'm a good husband? And she said, do you realize I'm the only woman who lives with you 7/24? So that has nothing to do with this poem. I just sort of came out. After a long illness, your head rests on her stomach. Softly, she pulls back your hair in a non-sexual way that is sexual. You rub her thigh in a sexual way that is non-sexual. There is so much to say that nothing is said as both of you touch and share. And then this is called The Velvet Dusk of Her Hair. My hands held her face as she died, and her name changed, becoming as unknowable as a language used to give life. I remember her brown hair sprinkled with gray. It seemed to sag when she left me. I don't know how God chose the moment of her death. Closing her eyes, I confirmed her life by calling Patsy. Already she was in transit crossing the border without a passport. No one could hurt her with names like Puta, Paco, or torture her with causeless hate tossed like insults from their eyes. Only she and God knows her new identity. When she passed, her body went limp, her eyes flicked open, and her lips impersonated a smile. Looking at her, it didn't matter that somewhere a sunset turned a sandstone cliff into a kaleidoscope of gold, orange, red, brown, and shale before the colors faded into night. In dreams, I hold Patsy's face and see her eyes veiled by the velvet dusk of her hair. This is called the Feast Day of Guardian Angels. It was almost noon when I fell asleep and swerved across lanes to spin circles on the road shoulder. I'd finished working 6 10-hour days in the Mojave Desert and was an hour into my drive home. Breathless from my spin out, I watched as the dust settled. Realizing I didn't crash, I whispered, "I'm alive," to my guardian angel. He had appeared by my open window, transparent as rain. He seemed composed of large drops. I tried to shake his hand, and he disappeared like raindrops on hot concrete. During breakfast, I told my wife about my accident and the sighting of my angel. Slapping her fork on the plate, she said, "If you loved me, you would have slept before you drove. Making it home proves God loves me. Please don't. All you do is joke around," she said, glaring at the hummingbird feeder and the birds fighting with transparent wings. I wanted to come home to you. You wanted enchiladas and beers. And she made me promise that from now on, I'd nap before I drove home. Later, her mother visited. I read in the living room as they cooked. Patsy told her mom that I saw my guardian angel. Her mama said, "Joe es santo." "Que no, mama," Patsy said, "es malo." And she repeated malo 7 times to describe how bad a husband I was. Then my guardian angel knocked the book from my hand. Crashing on the floor, it gave me the opportunity to pretend I'd been sleeping the whole time. And one more short poem, if that's all right. I think I'm about right. Winter Benediction. As my great-grandmother lay dying, the family, knowing she wouldn't last the night, stood around her bed and sang Polish hymns. My father placed me on her chest. At 3, I was lean and hard. She was soft without hope for children or spring. Unable to lift her head, she spoke softly like an overheard whisper. And as her arms slid open, she gave me words to live by. Entering the last years of my life, I spread my arms and give to you the same words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. So that's some great work. We're going to ask you some questions. There's already some questions in the chat that I will get to, but let me open with, your latest book, A Walk with Breast Cancer. How difficult was that to write?
It wasn't, well, when my wife died, I went into emergency the next day. And then after that, for about 6 months, I couldn't write. And I didn't have writer's block. I didn't want to write. I didn't want to do nothing pretty much. Then one day I said enough, and I sat down at the computer and tried to write. I went for a couple days, and finally I said, I have a book of poems that I'm editing, and I typed in a number, I think it was 112, and I said, this is the poem. And for 60 days straight, I filled up a notebook or a file of poems. And then it took me 7 years to get them ready for publication. So that kind of, it wasn't, they just kind of oozed out of me before I couldn't stop writing. And Jim Moreno's here, and he's in my writing group, or in our writing group. And they had to go through that for 7 years. Every week I'd be bringing in a poem.
So you had stated that your wife didn't want poems written about her. If she was able to communicate with you right now, how would she feel about your book?
She'd say, you know, Joe, this is a bunch of lies. Well, she was really a funny person, she was Mexican, but she had like a British sense of dry humor. And she would, one time she asked me to write her a love poem, and it took about 6 months, and I showed it to her. And she'd say things like, I don't know anything about poetry. So I show her my love poem. She says, this isn't a love poem. And I said, well, what do you think a love poem is? And she went to her room and pulled out a book, 20 Love Poems by Pablo Neruda, opened it up. And I said, well, Patsy, the truth is some poets write better than others. So she was, that kind of.
Now, is it easier, do you feel it's easier to write out of a place of pain or depression or not? How does it work for you?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I meditate in the morning or have quiet time, however it works. And then I let whatever's in me come out, and I write a variety of poems. But in the grieving period, writing about her was very helpful. And I knew when I went back through, I knew the ones that I was going to rework because they touched me. And so when I read what I write in the morning, sometimes months and years later, then if it touches me, then I'll rework it. If it doesn't move me, I kind of let it go.
Now, part one of your book is alphabet translations, where the letters trigger association. Is it the shape of the letters which makes you a visual writer, or is it words associated with the letter which makes it more of a mental process?
Both. After I wrote my Patsy poems, so to speak, to get my mind away, I revisited the alphabet. But when I was a kid, I couldn't write well. I still can't, handwriting. And my dad made me copy great works.
You just lost your audio.
Oh, and my,
We
how's
lost
this?
your audio completely. Oh, maybe I lost audio.
Yeah,
Hang
we
on.
can hear him, Tim.
All right.
Yes, we're good.
And, but I learned I had to visualize each letter to write it by itself. And the way I visualized it was a story. And I thought I'd try telling a story about every letter. So it starts out more stories and ends up more metaphysical by the time you get to Z.
The another review or blurb I read about your book was that you jump into the streams of consciousness, like of a whaling captain or even iron girders. Do you find it fun to do that, or is it just something that hits you?
If the opening is right, then free association comes. And so it all depends on the opening sentence to me. And sometimes I will have work that I like, and until I find that opening sentence, it'll never become a poem. And so that's what happens. It all triggers. A friend of mine, Bruce, he says, I like to sit down and describe nature, and then it goes into a poem. And there's some certain truth to that, because it's an intro.
You've also edited some anthologies. So would you like to talk a little bit about editing Steve Cowett's posthumous collection? And this is from John Wessick. How did you choose which poem to include? Did you reject a lot? And I guess Steve didn't reject any of them.
I only rejected poems by sailors, but not really. Jim Moreno's here, and he was the co-editor, and with Steve Cowett's wife. And when we sat down, we were all fans of his writing. And we said, let's pull out what books we had or what poems we like of his, and then see where we are. And when we got there, the editor wanted more work, and we filled in the work with Mary Cowett, who's a very fine artist, with her artwork. So it wasn't so much of cutting. We just, the book is really a book of love for a person who was our teacher and friend, but more so a love for his poetry.
Are you also willing to talk about an activist poetry anthology? And this is by Jim Moreno.
Oh yeah, well because Jim's is working, I'm working with Jim, and we're co-editors on The Activist. We belong to the Revolutionary Brigade, which is a cross-border association with Mexican poets and American poets to work against hate. And we worked against Donald Trump pretty much from the day he was elected until he was unelected. And these poets in here are poets of San Diego who work for social justice. And it's a real fine book. And the problem is we didn't have a room for all the good poets that are in San Diego working for social justice.
That's really interesting. I did a book tour in 2014. I went to San Diego, Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and all I heard was San Diego does not have a good writing community. So it sounds like it does. How do you get out there and promote San Diego as this writing hotbed?
I keep it a secret. Seriously, these the writers, artists come together, and in San Diego, yeah, we have the same poetry wars, or age different, all these different differences. But it's a very exciting scene, and it's just a matter of opening up to where they are. COVID really hurt us because the poet lost their brick and mortar places to read. And so it became more just smaller groups going to Zoom readings. but now it's starting to open up, and we have a place in Barrio Logan that is really, Ted Washington does down here, and it's really good, has a lot of young, good poets. Jim Morano does a Sunday poetry gig, second Sunday. So it's a scene that people don't recognize because they think of us as a bunch of surfers.
The surfer poets.
Yeah, the surfer poet.
You also have a,
Go
you
ahead.
also have of short stories. Home plate was the heart. Now, is in this book, is home plate a metaphor for like home, or is it baseball stories?
Yes, home plate. I grew up in a baseball family in Detroit, and my great grandfather, who came over in 1900, took my grandfather to see Ty Cobb. My grandfather took my dad to see Babe Ruth. My dad took me to see Ted Williams. Throughout our home, I mean, the way they became American in their minds, being Polish immigrants and Irish immigrants, was to learn baseball and to talk baseball. And the whole family centered around baseball the whole life. And even in the winter, you talk baseball. So it's the center of it. They're all what they call flash fiction. They're not long, and there's about 30 pieces in there. About a half page to a page and a half usually. And they all deal with family and going through. There are 3 major stories that have home plate in them that carry the theme. But
It sounds very interesting. You got your MFA in San Diego State a little bit of time ago. What is the one thing, the most important thing that you picked up for your writing at your MFA program?
for my writing,
Yeah.
well, I think the most important thing that I learned from the MFA, just for writing purposes, was structure of a poem, rhythm, rhyme, not in the form of like end rhymes, but rhyme is association with different words that sound similar, what you might call similar sounds, consonants, assonants, rhymes in the end line, middle, so that, you vary them. And I think that helps tell the story, and structure of opening, middle, and end, which really sounds basic, but it carries the poem for me. And then I discovered about maybe 100 different writers I never heard of that I've got in my collection. So I think those were kind of like the highlights of it.
So you start with a solid line and a solid opening line, and do free association. How do you know when your poem ends?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if I really ever know if it ends. And many times I'll have a poem I think is finished and the ending is never there. And then all of a sudden one day it comes. That's why it takes me like 7 years between books, because it's hard to get the good ending,
Now, do you feel that the poem has to simmer and settle a bit before you can finish it?
Yeah, I have a stack of poems. I call it my mushroom box because I put them in the dark and see what mushrooms. And
back to San Diego, and I can't think of San Diego without thinking of Anchorman. Now, do the people of San Diego like Anchorman, or is it like Portlandia, where people really don't like the show Portlandia?
well, I've never seen the show Anchorman. So I don't know. No one's told me about it. I guess I'll have to make a note and look it up.
Well, the famous line that San Diego means whale's vagina. which I can't think of San Diego now without thinking of Will Ferrell delivering that line.
Oh, I see. I know what you're talking about now. Yeah, I don't find San Diego anything like that movie. I'm sure though, with Comic-Con in town today, that you could go downtown and find a bunch of people that would.
So what's your next literary endeavor that's coming out? What are you working on?
Right now, I'm just writing poetry and getting them, sending them out to get published and trying to go out and sell as many books as I can I'm with a new publisher, Garden Oaks Press, and I really like them, so.
Well, speaking of selling as many books as possible, here is the new book that came out in 2022, A Walk with Breast Cancer. And you can get all of the details available at Amazon, and I'm sure it's available at bookshop.org or other places if you are anti-Amazon. I guess the most important thing is if you like Joseph's work, pick up A Walk with Breast Cancer. And Joseph, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
And any of the folks that are watching in the Facebook Live group streaming, we're going to shut you down. But if you would like to come in and read at the open mic, just use the Zoom link. I will welcome you in. And come back next week. We do not have a week off. So thanks again, Joseph.
Thank you.